Reverend Fred. I rise tonight after the successful unanimous adoption by the New South Wales Legislative Council of the motion that recognise the Assyrian and Greek genocides. In remembering these events, we do not seek to apportion blame. This is a matter of history, and history must neither be erased nor forgotten. We must remember and speak the truth. New South Wales recently visited by the world-renowned scholar Professor Tanner Akam, who I personally met, and he had previously been from Turkey, and he said, quote, "We must create a global awareness of genocides and their prevention. Genocide denial and the struggle against it are part of global democracy and human rights. Recognition is an issue relevant to all humanity," end of quote. Anzacs, men of New South Wales, were eyewitnesses of the genocides. Anzacs rescued survivors of the massacres and deportations across the Ottoman Empire between 1915 and 1918. People of our great state donated generously to save the lives of those who had reached the sanctuary in Greece, French Syria, British Iraq and British Palestine. The story of the Armenian, Assyrian and Greek genocides are part of the Australian story and deserve their rightful place in that narrative. The genocides of the indigenous people of the Ottoman Empire that took place during World War I and its aftermath are a historical event. The victims of this criminal act were the indigenous peoples of the Ottoman Empire, Greeks, Armenians and Assyrians. Many members of this chamber have substantial numbers of Australian Greeks and Australian Armenian people in their communities. Hundreds of thousands of them have made their homes in New South Wales over the past 2 centuries. All these groups suffered at the hands of the government of the Ottoman Empire. As early as 1910, plans were formulated and published for the elimination of the indigenous Christians of the Ottoman Empire, part of the government's efforts to homogenise its population. Those populations, documents, and millions more like them are available today, demonstrating the intention of the Ottoman government of the time. I am indebted to the research of Dr. Dominus and Dr. Victor Badman, Director of the Australian Institute of Holocaust and Genocide Studies. Their pioneer efforts have provided the evidence of this genocide. The truth of the genocide, the truth of what happened to the Armenian, Assyrian, Greeks people, it is in the records of our own Australian servicemen. We should remember and learn from such dark chapters in human history. In the same spirit, we can secure recognition of a genocide which is very real and very heartfelt by the Assyrian community, by the Australian Greek community and by the Australian Armenian community in Australia today, lest we forget.
The Honourable Linda Bolts.
Thank you, Mr. Acting President.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you. Good evening. My name is Olga Sadorides. I would like to welcome our distinguished guests, family and friends this evening, and I shall acknowledge all our distinguished guests shortly. We would like to pay tribute to the traditional owners of this land, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, particularly the elders past and present. Please now stand for the national anthems of Australia and Greece. On behalf of the Hellenic Pontian Genocide Committee, I welcome you all to the annual Hellenic Genocide Commemoration. This year, our committee is comprised of all the Hellenic Pontian organisations of New South Wales. We are very proud to be here together in this auditorium for such a special occasion. And we thank our host, the Honourable Sophie Kotsis, Member of the Legislative Council, Shadow Minister for Local Government, Industrial Relations and for the Status of Women, for this opportunity to be here. Please be patient as I acknowledge our distinguished guests who have not only joined us in this evening, but also support the purpose of our gathering here tonight. I apologise in advance for any names that I may have inadvertently missed, but I will do my best to make sure everyone has been acknowledged. His Excellency, Consul General of Greece, Mr. Vasilios Tolios, and his wife, Mrs. Dora Tomanidou Tolios, representing His Excellency Mr. Charalambos Zarafanos, who unfortunately could not be here tonight. Father Nicholas Toulokidis, representing His Eminence Archbishop Stylianos. The Honourable Sophie Kotsis, MLC, Shadow Minister for Local Government, Industrial Relations and for the Status of Women. The Honourable Gladys Berejiklian, Member of Parliament for Willoughby and Minister for Transport. The Honourable David Clark, Parliamentary Secretary for Justice. The Honourable Reverend Fred Nile, the Christian Democratic Party, and we especially thank him once again for his attendance this evening. The Honourable Linda Burney, Member of Parliament for Canterbury. The Honourable Jonathan O'Day, Member of Parliament for Davidson. Mr. David Shoebridge, Member of the Legislative Council for the Green Party. Mr. Robert Ferrullo, Member for Lakemba and Shadow Minister for Roads. Mr. Harry Danalis, President of the Greek Community of New South Wales. Mr. John Theodoridis, President of the Grand Lodge of the Order of Ahepa, New South Wales. Mrs. Litsa Diakobassili, President of the District Lodge of the Order of Ahepa, New South Wales. Mrs. Helen Makris, Organisation of Hellenic and Cypriot Hellenic Women of New South Wales Committee. The Mayor of Kogarah City Council, Councillor Nicholas Varvaris. Mr. Steve McMahon, former Mayor of Hurstville and candidate for the seat of Barton in the coming elections. Mr. Vanche Karamanian, Executive Director of the Armenian National Committee of New South Wales. Mr. Hermes Shahen, Secretary of the Assyrian Universal Alliance Australian Chapter and his committee. Thank you to the President of the Jewish Board of Studies, Australia, Mr. Peter Wertheim. Mr. Yair Miller, President of the Jewish Board of Deputies, New South Wales, and executive members of the board who are present today. We are honoured to have with us tonight members of the board of the Australian Institute of Holocaust and Genocide Studies, Professor Colin Tatz, Vice President and Mrs. Sandra Tatz, Mr. Alexander Westwood. Finally, we have to thank our fellow Pontians from interstate who have joined us this evening. Miss Anna Volis from South Australia, Mr. Onofios Gorozidis from the Pontic Foundation of Maneia Sumila, Melbourne, Mr. Peter Stefanidis, President of the Pontian Educational and Cultural Association of Victoria, Mr. George Kovridis from Efskinos Bondos, Melbourne, Mr. Costa Anatoniadis, President, Pontian Community of Melbourne, and Mr. Apostolos Alexiadis, Pontian Association of Whittlesea, Victoria. To begin the proceedings, I would like to invite Father Nicholas Toulokidis, President, representing His Eminence Archbishop Stylianos, Primate of the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese of Australia, for a blessing. Is he here? He hasn't arrived? Well, when he comes, he can do it. Yeah? Okay, we'll wait for him when he comes. Okay. As we will hear from our speakers tonight, commemorations such as this are held all over the world during the month of May to mark the loss of so many innocent lives and the destruction of an indigenous culture in its native land. In the aftermath of the Armenian and Assyrian genocides, the Ottoman Turkish state turned its sights on the last indigenous Christian population in eastern Anatolia, the Greeks of the Black Sea coast, the Greeks of Pontus. This year, we celebrate the recognition by the Parliament of New South Wales of the genocide of the Armenian, Greek and Assyrian people by the Ottoman government. The Honourable Reverend Fred Nile moved the motion in the Legislative Council on the 1st of May and the Premier, the Honourable Barry O'Farrell, in the Legislative Assembly on the 8th of May. To both these courageous leaders, our community offers our eternal gratitude. Yes. Ladies and gentlemen, may I now welcome our host for this evening, Ms. Sophie Kotsis, to say a few words. And she's not here because she's in Parliament, so when she's available, she will come as yes straight away. All right, I would now like to welcome the Honourable David Clark to say a few words.
Well, thank you very much, and dear friends, can I tell you that it's a great honour and joy to be here tonight at this function organised for the Hellenic Pontian Genocide commemoration. And can I tell you tonight that I feel very, very happy. And I feel happy because I can look each and every one of you here tonight squarely in the eye, members of the Greek community, of the Assyrian community and the Armenian community. I can look each and every one of you in the eye and say that the Parliament of New South Wales has acted to declare the truth of the genocide that has been carried out against those three communities all of those years ago. This Parliament is a Parliament of democracy, a Parliament of freedom, a Parliament of justice, a Parliament of truth. And all of these things are at stake when we look at the issue of the genocide committed against the Greeks and the Assyrians and the Armenians those 70, 80 odd years ago. So, can I say this to you, friends? We are not going to be intimidated by any force in the world for declaring what the truth is. Not now and not ever. And I pay tribute to the Reverend the Honourable Fred Nile and to Barry O'Farrell, the Premier of the State of New South Wales, for having the courage and the conviction to go ahead with these motions in both Houses of Parliament. And I thank each and every member of the upper house and the lower house, because each and every member of this Parliament, from the government, from the opposition, from each party, the minor parties, the crossbench, each and every one of them supported these motions, each and every one of them. Is this not a great and wonderful thing in support of truth and justice for those people who were murdered those 70, 80 years ago, dear friends? So I feel a great sense of joy and relief that we have planted a flag of truth in the ground here in this Parliament of New South Wales, and may it serve to shine the light for other parliaments around the world to take a similar stand in support of freedom and justice and truth. Thank you very much.
I would like to ask the Honourable Linda Burney to come up and say a few words.
Thank you very much for that, and good evening, everybody. Sophie will join us soon, and I'm sure she'll welcome you as the parliamentary host. But I'm here representing John Robertson, the Leader of the Opposition, and also, of course, bring with me the well-wishers of the New South Wales Labor Party. Can I also recognise, as we started this evening, that we are on Gadigal country, and one of the wonderful things about this Parliament is that we pay that respect every morning in both houses of the Parliament, recognising country. Can I recognise the Consul General and his wonderful wife Dora, and the other parliamentarians here this evening? I just want to say three things tonight. Tonight is that tonight this ceremony embraces some very important things. It embraces, most importantly, the capacity and the importance of truth-telling. It also embraces the crucial nature of remembering, because that remembrance gives us an eye to who we are these days and into the future. But I also wanted to just touch personally on such horrors as is being commemorated this evening. The genocides that we're commemorating this evening has a very personal side to it as well, and particularly personal for the communities represented here. So firstly, with that notion of truth-telling, Coming from an Aboriginal background, I can stand in the shoes that you're standing in very, very much. David made the point about truth-telling. Well, one of the things that this country did for over 200 years was deny the truth about what took place on these lands to Aboriginal people. So we have a very close connection with the remembrance tonight. Truth-telling liberates a country. Truth-telling grows a place up. And truth-telling is critical for a nation to move forward, remembering and recognising. And as Mandela and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa understood, that truth-telling is a basic plank to reconciliation. Just very quickly, remembering it is so crucial that these commemorations and what we're remembering tonight is observed reverently and respectfully, because remembering gives us our history, gives us an eye into who we are and why we are and how we are today. And finally, can I just say that the poignancy of this evening is about this is not something that happened to other people. It happened to your people. It happened to your fathers, your grandfathers, your grandmothers, your great-grandparents. So it's personal. And that is the most important thing I want to pay respect to this evening. Thank you.
I'd now like to welcome the Reverend Honourable Fred Nile to the stage.
Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests and the Consul General, it's a privilege to have this opportunity to say a few words to you tonight. I have many, many happy memories of my visits to Greece and seeing on one occasion, the Greek elections, which you know is always very exciting, and to see other events in Greece. So I have happy memories of Greece. It was a privilege to have the opportunity to move the motion. I've been following this whole issue of genocide for many years, and it came to a climax when the opportunity was presented to present a motion which had been prepared by leaders of the various groups, the Assyrians and others. I don't take credit for the wording of the motion. The motion was put together by very knowledgeable people, and I was very happy to move it and for it to be passed unanimously in the New South Wales Legislative Council, the Upper House, our state Senate, and later, as you know, the Premier moved the same motion in the Legislative Assembly, and it also was unanimous. In following up the issue of genocide, I've agreed to accept the invitation to visit Armenia in a few weeks' time, and we'll be shown some of the matters that affected the Armenian people in the genocide of that community. So I'm sure that'll be a very moving experience for me and for, I think there's 23 of us going in the party from the State Parliament. I'm very sad that I'm now on the hit list of the Turkish Consul General here in New South Wales. He's not very happy with me and wrote me a very strong letter condemning me. And sadly, he spoke of a motion reflecting hate speech. So you may all study that motion, and you won't find anywhere in that motion anything sounding like hate speech. So he's completely misinterpreting the motion and its intention. So that's a false accusation. I then wrote a letter replying to his accusations, and hopefully he will take on board what I did say to him. But I understand that the Turkish Foreign Affairs Department decided to join in the criticism, and I understand there's some sort of a ban being instituted on all the members of the New South Wales Parliament from visiting Turkey, especially for the Gallipoli commemorations. Now, I hope that's not true, but we've been told that's a statement that's been issued from the Turkish capital. Sadly, as you would well recognise, they are completely misunderstanding the purpose of the motion. We're not in any way trying to create divisions. We want to promote harmony and unity. We are all members of the human race, and we need to live together and work together. And I hope and pray that the Turkish government will understand that. In no way are we targeting them, the modern nation of Turkey today. We have had many friendly cooperations with the modern nation of Turkey, as you know, in Korea, Our Australian soldiers fought side by side with the Turkish regiments there under the United Nations authority, and have had similar cooperation in other war-torn events. So we want to see that cooperation continue between Australia and Turkey, and I believe it will. So thank you again for your support and encouragement. Thank you.
As the Federal Parliament is sitting in Canberra this week, we have apologies from both members of the Senate and the House of Representatives who were regrettably unable to be with us tonight. These are Senator Nick Xenophon from from South Australia, Senator Arthur Synodinos from New South Wales, the Honourable Joel Fitzgibbon, Member of Hunter, Chief Government Whip, Mr Scott Morrison, Federal Member for Cook and Shadow Minister for Immigration and Citizenship, the Honourable Tony Burke, Minister for Sustainability, Environment, Water, Population and Communities, Mr Michael Atkinson, MP from South Australia. We also have apologies from Ms Esther Basalidis Hilas, Councillor of Canterbury Council, and the Honourable Marie Vicara, Member of New South Wales Parliament, Mr Vic Alderhef, CEO of the New South Wales Jewish Board of Deputies, the Mayor of Rockdale City Council, Councillor Shane O'Brien. We thank them all for their interest and unfailing support, especially those members who have publicly acknowledged the historical reality of the Armenian, Greek and Assyrian genocide and have urged the Australian Government to recognise this crime against humanity. Dr Panayotis Diamadis is Lecturer of Genocide Studies at the University of Technology, Sydney, and a senior history teacher at a prominent independent school. Since 1998, he has worked with the Australian Institute for Holocaust and Genocide Studies, of which Dr Diamadis is currently a Vice President. He has completed 4 tertiary qualifications, the highest of which is a doctorate in Genocide Studies. His doctoral thesis is titled Hellenism Under the Crescent, is a pioneering study of the Greek genocide. For the first time, using the prism of genocide studies, it was demonstrated why the Hellenic experience constitutes genocide under international law. Amongst Dr. Diamadis' more recent publications are Children and War, Genocide Perspectives 4, Australian Responses to the Hellenic, Armenian and Assyrian genocides, with references to the Shoah, Genocide Prevention Now, Australia's first Commissioner for Refugees, Journal of the Royal Australian Historical Society, and Why Macedonia Matters, American Hellenic Institute Journal. A prolific public speaker in Australia and internationally, he has presented academic papers and public lectures in Australia, Israel, Austria and England, as well as Greece. His most recent public lecture was at the 2013 Lumed Oz Festival of Jewish Culture. This evening, Dr. Diamadis will be addressing the topic of education and genocide, the relationship between the pedagogical process and the phenomenon of genocide. Ladies and gentlemen, may I introduce Dr. Panayotis Diamadis.
Καλησπέρα σε όλους. Thank you for the invitation to speak for. No, I won't take too long. I'll take about 20 minutes. Hope you can put up with me for that long. Basi Maraba Aturaya. Thank you very much, especially to our Assyrian friends, our Armenian friends. I don't see Vach. He said he'd be late. Gladys. Especially parliamentary colleagues who we will be honouring later tonight. Kyria Yenike, Kyria Proxenos. Thank you to everybody for attending. And in a weird kind of a way, tonight is a celebration. It's a celebration of the recognition that all our parliamentary speakers have referred to, including our very great MC so far. But it's also, hey, we're only halfway through the program, you have to go so far. But also because it's a success of the unity of the Pondian associations of New South Wales especially, but broader in Australia. In my bio, as you heard, I've been working in this field, can't believe it's been 15 years now, since I first met the Tatsas at Macquarie Uni all those years ago and became one of Colin's students. So for me personally, it's a very great honour that Colin is here this evening. He, along with a guy that a lot of people in our community will know, Vrasila Karali, who is now a full professor as well, got me through my PhD and helped me to understand a few things. Most importantly, not only what is genocide and why genocide should be recognised by our parliamentarians, by our school programs, which is what I'll be talking to especially tonight, but also how do we go about preventing future ones. Now, I know the PowerPoint's playing up a bit. I'm going to try and fix the timings in a second, but I particularly would like to go back to one that talks, that mentions, where is it? That one. That one. I'd like you to look at the last line. Let's go. The last line, the recognition of such events is to ensure that we as a community prevent any repeat of such incidents in the future. This is the point. This is not hate speech. These recognitions, these motions of recognitions, αυτές οι αναγνωρίσεις, δεν έχουν στόχο κανέναν άλλο λαό. Είναι η αναγνώριση, είναι η δικαίωση της αναγνώρισης. It is the justice of recognition. The only justice that the unjustly lost have. They're gone. It's been almost a century since they've been gone. The only justice left to them is the justice of their descendants and the representatives that we elect, be it in New South Wales, in Victoria, in Canberra, as you saw in many other countries around the world. This is not hate speech. This is recognition of historical events. Why? To avoid repetition. The slogan that I see a lot at Shoah commemorations when I've on my visits to Jerusalem, to Yad Vashem. For those who don't know, Yad Vashem is the world's center of Holocaust studies. And I had the privilege there last year to actually present a lecture there on Australian responses to genocide. And I started with, Miss Burney had to duck upstairs back to the chamber, started with Australian Aborigines. Our experience with Australian Aborigines. And what did Australia do in response to our particular genocides? And then what did Australia do with regard to the Holocaust, to the Shoah? Very different experiences of recognition, of acknowledgement, very different series of action. But all these experiences are Australian. They are Australian history. So therefore it is, in my opinion, quite correct, and I'll argue till I'm blue in the face with anybody who wants to challenge that, it is very correct that our parliamentary representatives acknowledge this. We live in Australia, we are Australian. The evidence that we presented to our parliamentarians, both those who moved the motions, Reverend Nile in the Legislative Council, Mr. O'Farrell in the Legislative Assembly. What did we present? We presented Australian history, Australian testimonies. This would not have happened. This I go back to my first comments. This goes back to the success and the support of the Pondian associations of New South Wales especially, but also throughout Australia, most of whom are represented here tonight. And I'm greatly honoured, especially from Melbourne. I'm not going to go through the whole list again, but I will mention Mrs. Kotanidis from Return to Anatolia, who somehow was not on the list. So, Sofia, Eleni, thank you for coming up as well. From Melbourne. It's education. 1998, the Pondian associations approached the then Centre for Comparative Genocide Studies at Macquarie University and said we would like to support. We are the now second generation of survivors. So we would like to support the work of your centre. And 15 years later, we still work together, we still collaborate. The result, ο καρπός αυτής της συνεργασίας, είναι η αναγνώριση που πετύχαμε πριν από 1 μήνα. Η αναγνώριση που ήρθε σε αυτή τη Βουλή και οι επόμενες αναγνωρίσεις που θα έρθουν. Και μην νομίζω ότι θα σταματήσουμε, δεν σταματάμε τώρα. Και οι επόμενες αναγνωρίσεις που θα έρθουν και στις υπόλοιπες βουλές εδώ στην Αυστραλία είναι καρπός της δουλειάς που κάνουν όλοι οι ποντιακοί συλλόγοι μαζί. Και το τονίζω, μαζί. It has to be. We have achieved these successes through education. We have been educating our parliamentarians. We have been educating our leaders. Not just political leaders, business leaders, education leaders. As you heard from my bio, apart from running the Genocide Studies course at the University of Technology, I also teach history at a secondary school. I don't want to get them into trouble, so I'm not going to mention which school it is. But those of you who know me know which school it is. And this is why a lot of you will have in the folder in front of you a document on genocide studies in the New South Wales history curriculum and genocide studies in the Australian curriculum, which starts next year. And this is a very, very exciting time for teachers. Massive changes in education. The Holocaust is being brought in as a compulsory unit for Year 10, which most schools will start in 2015. Ironically, maybe deliberately, the centenary of the Armenian genocide. Centenary of Anzac, so maybe that's why they picked it as well, even though we do Anzac in Year 9, not Year 10. This document is just my summary, our works, our institute's summary of how genocide studies can fit into the existing syllabus. We are not saying we should have a separate unit on genocide studies. Hey, that'd be great, but it's not going to happen. There are too many other pressures on the education timetable. So how do we fit in genocide studies? How do we fit in the experiences that convinced our parliamentarians to adopt these motions of resolution, these motions of recognition, sorry. How do we get them into the syllabus, into the curriculum? The document is right here in front of you. Those of you who are teachers, if you haven't gotten a copy, please see me at the end and I'll get you an electronic copy. What we've done is that we've looked at the various topics that have to be taught in Australian schools. And we say, this is where you can teach the Armenian, the Hellenic, the Assyrian, the Jewish experiences of genocide. The indigenous perspective is kind of separate because it's compulsory anyway. But we've added it here as well. For example, in national curriculum, I'm very conscious of the time, national curriculum next year, we must look at the forced removal of children. We must look at, as we say in Greek, to pedomazoma. Not the Greek Civil War pedomazoma, but the original one. When those of you who might know, some of you, a lot of you might know Theo Harlow's book, Not Even My Name, about her mother's experience. Her mother, who is now, I think, 102, is she up to now? 103. She was one of these children who survived the death marches from her village in the mountains of Bondos, ended up in what is now the battlefields of Syria, was adopted, kind of, in inverted commas, adopted by a Muslim family, raised for a bit, ended up being rescued by the Near East Relief Organisation, which was very active here in Australia, and eventually made her way to America, where she married an Assyrian man and had a family and continues to live today. So Theo Harlow, the author, is half Assyrian and half Pondian, half Greek. As Ms. Burney very, very correctly said, this is very personal. Now, I'm not Pondian. My family's from the western half of Greece. But that's irrelevant. Είμαστε όλοι Έλληνες. And this is why, this is a message that I'm deliberately saying a few things in Greek for those that were lost. It was their language. The reason that they were targeted was because of who they were. So in a way, we're honouring them by even these few words, using them, their language, using their identity, reminding them. When I go to Jerusalem, when I go to Israel, there's this very touching little thing that you notice, especially around cemeteries and memorials. They always leave a little stone on the grave or at the memorial. Δεν σας ξεχάσαμε. We have not forgotten you. It's an act of remembrance, but it's a very powerful act of remembrance. Never forget or do not forget. It's kind of passive, isn't it? How do you actively not forget? Well, you actively remember. Άλλο δεν ξεχνώ και άλλο θυμάμαι. Σας θυμάμαι. It is an active. Είναι ενεργητικός. Ενεργητική λέξη. By teaching genocide, by teaching about these experiences in our schools, in our universities, we are actively remembering. We are actively reminding the next generation of leaders. My daughter's generation, the one coming after that, the one in between. In other words, the group that I'm teaching now at high school. This is not just something that can be forgotten or should be forgotten. When the Anzacs landed at Gallipoli at dawn of the 25th of April, the leaders of the Armenian community of Constantinople didn't become Istanbul until the 1930s, were being executed because of who they were. Launched the whole execution of an entire group of people because of who they were. This is what genocide is. You attempt to eliminate a group of people because of who they are. It doesn't matter how many people died. Ultimate proof of this. Just, Colin reminded me, it was Guatemala, was last month, wasn't it? The High Court of the little country called Guatemala in Central America. Guatemala is a whole country, it's about the size of Peloponneso, all right, but it's a country by itself. Convicted a former president of genocide. Former president of the country was convicted of genocide. How many people was he responsible for killing? Less than are in my school. About 1,500. Numbers don't matter. How many people died does not matter in defining whether it's genocide or not. What is genocide? Genocide is there an intent? Does the government intend to destroy a particular group of people? This is the defining issue. If you can prove intent to destroy, that is genocide. How do we educate against that? You cannot legislate against that. We can legislate, and personally I'm in favour of legislation that would outlaw genocide denial. But that's a very difficult one to throw to the parliamentarians, but I'll throw it anyway. It's very difficult to hear someone say, sorry, you're lying. Okay, if I'm lying, where am I lying? Whereas, please challenge me. Oh, you're just lying. As we saw before from, and as we heard from Reverend Niall, sorry, I'll go backwards, with the Anzacs, the Anzac anniversary. It's particularly, I wasn't really going to mention it, but I will since Reverend Niall brought it up. It's particularly poignant that in the lead up to the anniversary, the centenary of Anzac in a few short months, a bit over a year, no, you people are bad people. You're not allowed to come because you adopted this motion recognising this chapter of Australian history. How do you legislate against that? How do you legislate against hate? We can legislate till the cows come home. How do we change it? Only through education can we change it. Only through education. Η παιδεία είναι το παν. Δεν είναι μόνο η ενημέρωση των πολιτικών. Είναι η παιδεία. Να μάθουν ότι δεν γίνονται αυτά τα πράγματα. Δεν πρέπει να γίνονται αυτά τα πράγματα. Δεν πρέπει να μισήσεις κάποιον επειδή είναι αυτό το άτομο. The only way to understand genocide, which is the ultimate expression of hatred, the only way to understand this phenomenon is to learn, to study it, to educate about it. And this is exactly what our centre has been trying to do for many years and will continue to do hopefully for many more. And we're now seeing it's a big growth area, especially in Europe and in America, the phenomenon of studying this evil. I generally try and avoid using theological terms, but there's not much of another way to describe it. We need education, not only for our MPs, not only for our parliamentarians, both future and present. We need education for our next generation of leaders, journalists, opinion makers, teachers, academics. We cannot stop something we don't understand. We cannot avoid a repetition of something we do not understand. We need to understand what happened. We need to understand not only the bad things, the hatred. We need to understand the good side of genocide. And yes, although it sounds very strange, there is a good side of genocide. Those who said no. Those who said, I'm not going to do this. Some simply walked away. Okay. Some risked their own lives to save, to rescue. There is stories, and there's a member of this House, this member of this Parliament, who is standing in Parliament today because a group of Australians said, no, I'm not going to allow these people, these refugees, these survivors of earlier massacres to be killed. Some of the group of people that these group of Australians or part of a group called the Dunster Force. Two of the people that these Anzacs rescued were the grandparents of Andy Rowan MP, member for Smithfield upstairs. He's standing there because those Australians, Captain Savage, Captain Judge, Captain Hooper, said, no, I'm going to stop it. They were Australians, they'd been there, they were sent out on a mission. They didn't manage to fulfill the mission, didn't have enough support, so they came back. This is Australian history. These are Australian stories, but they're also very personal stories. We have the story of, in the Jordan Valley of what is now southern Israel, Anzacs on camels, the Camel Corps, riding up, pushing north against the Ottoman army. And they're picking up refugees who are heading the other way, putting them on the camels to ride so they can't not have to walk anymore and taking them to safety. These are Australian stories. These are the stories of World War I. And these are the stories that we need to tell our students, that you need to tell your families. Our survivors are almost gone. The Armenian genocide, the Assyrian genocide survivors are almost gone. I only know of one survivor left in Sydney. He's now, Papouso Kostas Tsanidis, he's what, 104? No, he's over 100. We lost one, the eldest survivor. We're pretty sure the eldest survivor passed away last week. She was 110. She was from, today it's called Nevşehir. Back then it was Neapoli, Cappadocia, in the center of Anatolia. She survived and she set up a family, came here. Their stories must not be forgotten. This is education. Education is not just what happens in the classroom. Education, the best education, the most influential education is what happens at home, guys. Οι παππούδες έχουν την ευθύνη, οι γιαγιάδες έχουν την ευθύνη να μεταφέρουν τις ιστορίες των οικογενειών σας στην επόμενη γενιά. Αυτή είναι η ευθύνη όλων σας. Όπως η γιαγιά η δική μου έλεγε για τους βομβαρδισμούς των Ιταλών το 1940, κοντά στο χωριό μας, έξω από τα Γιάννα, έχετε και εσείς την ευθύνη να πείτε οι παππούδες σας πέρασαν αυτό και αυτό και αυτό. Όχι για μίσος, για να μην ξεχνιούνται οι ιστορίες. Our friends in the Jewish community are in a very similar position. Very soon, maybe 10 years, maybe 15 years, all their survivors will be gone. Who's going to tell the stories? How are we going to continue to educate? These are some of the questions that I leave you with. We need education, not just formal education in the classroom. Education starts at home. Education about hatred. And I've deliberately avoided the word race because it does not exist. It's made up. It's probably one of the most obnoxious words in the English language. And I'm very glad that Reverend Niall mentioned that we are all part of the human race. That's the only race that exists. So therefore, racism is just a nicer word for hatred. You hate someone because of who they are. We need to educate. Education is the only way to prevent future genocides. Thank you for your attention.
Would Helen Makris and John Theodoridis come to the stage to make a presentation to Dr. Diamandis? I know, why is it different in Greek and in English? Not an end in Greek. Okay, Dr. Diamandis.
Hang on.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been indeed a historical year for us here in New South Wales. And at this stage of the proceedings this evening, the Ponting communities of New South Wales would like to thank some special people for taking that big leap of faith and recognising that unforgettable chapter of our history. I would like to call upon Mr. Constantine Kyriakidis to present to Mr. David Clark, representing the Premier, the Honourable Barry O'Farrell, a token of gratitude and thanks. Thank you. Mr. Konefthimiadis to present to the Reverend Honourable Fred Nile. So this brings to a close this evening's proceedings. You're all welcome to adjourn to the foyer for refreshments. Thank you.
Mr. Acting Speaker, I seek leave of the House to permit the moving of a motion forthwith regarding the anniversary of the Armenian genocide and a maximum of 2 speakers to the motion for a period of up to 5 minutes each.
Is leave granted? Yes. Leave is granted.
Mr. Acting Speaker, I move that this House, 1, notes that on the 17th of April 1997, the House recognised and condemned the genocide of the Armenians by the then Ottoman government between 1915 and 1922, and designated 24 April of every year thereafter as a day of remembrance for the 1.5 million Armenians who fell victim to the first genocide of the 20th century. 2, recognises that Assyrians and Greeks were subjected to qualitatively similar genocides by the then Ottoman government between 1915 and 1922. 3, reaffirms its condemnation of the genocide of the Assyrians, Armenians and Greeks and all other acts of genocide as the ultimate act of intolerance. 5, recognises the importance of remembering and learning from such dark chapters in human history to ensure that such crimes against humanity are not allowed to be repeated. 6, acknowledges and pays tributes to the contribution of the Anzac servicemen who aided the survivors of the genocide. And 7, acknowledges the significant humanitarian relief contribution made by the people of New South Wales to the victims and survivors of the genocide. Mr. Acting Speaker, the horrors of the genocide lives deep within the hearts of many people across our community. When migrants choose to make a new life in Australia, they often leave behind the marginalisation they've experienced in their homelands. For many, the decision to migrate can be a painful one, and being forced to leave one's motherland due to oppression or persecution is devastating. Genocide has been something too many settlers on these shores have escaped from, and I move this motion to recognise the genocide of the Armenians, Greeks and Assyrians, which occurred after 1915. This motion reflects the community's determination that genocide is never forgotten and is recognised around the world. Madam Speaker, we can take pride that New South Wales offers safe haven for people who face genocide around the world, whether those being remembered in this motion or in subsequent times. We can take pride that within New South Wales, individuals in these communities have rebuilt their lives, salvaged their identities, and now they can be identified as Australian as well as with their homelands. The Armenian, Assyrian and Greek communities continue to play a significant role in helping shape the vibrant cosmopolitan character and culture that characterises New South Wales. Especially in the small business sector, individuals and families from these communities are shining examples of the benefits to this state and this nation of multiculturalism. Having left war-torn countries in the Middle East, many Armenians, Assyrians and Greeks established small businesses which continue to thrive decades later. Madam Speaker, I make special mention of the member for Smithfield, Andy Rowan, whose parents were amongst the refugees who fled these atrocities and settled in this country. The member for Smithfield has previously recognised the National Day of Remembrance of the Genocides in this Parliament. In moving this motion, I acknowledge a similar motion moved in the Legislative Council by the Honourable Fred Nile MLC. Madam Speaker, like the motion passed with the support of both sides of politics in this place 16 years ago, this motion should continue to enjoy the support of this Parliament. To address such horrific crimes of the past maintains our vigilance to prevent such acts against humanity.